currently the interim. Thank you. Dr. Macy is currently the interim dean of the College of Liberal Arts and a professor of English at the University of Central Oklahoma in Edmond. He has chaired the UCO's Committee on Diversity and has served for more than 2 decades as the faculty advisor to the Students Alliance for Equality, SAFE, UCO's 2S LGBTQIA+ student organization. Dr. Macy has served as a board member for the National Unitarian Universalist 2S LGBTQIA+ organization, Interweave Continental, for CSUS Youth, a nonprofit organization providing services to homeless youth in Oklahoma City, and for the Diversity Center of Oklahoma, among others. He is currently a member of the board of directors for the Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice. Thank you, Dr. Macy, for joining us. We have Dr. Dickens, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Tulsa Community College, a position to support student success. Through his office, students are assisted with their use of research-based study strategies, leadership development, and balancing of life concerns through success coaching. Dr. Dickens also served as a developmental English associate professor at the Tulsa Community College for over 18 years. Dr. Dickens is active in social justice issues throughout the region, reflected in his work with several organizations throughout the area, such as the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation, the Greater Tulsa African American Affairs Commission, the Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice, Racism Stinks, and Oklahoma Humanities. Along with serving as a board member for TCA, the Tulsa Community College Preparatory, he joined the Leadership Tulsa 2021 Thrive Tulsa members to collaborate, to collaborate with other leaders within the Tulsa community to promote partnership for social advocacy and for the often unheard voices. Thank you, Dr. Dickens, for joining us. We also have Megan Lambert, the legal director at ACLU of Oklahoma Foundation. Megan received her Juris Doctorates from the University of Oklahoma and joined the ACLU of Oklahoma as a Gallagher Fellow in 2017. In 2021, Megan filed the nation's first challenge to classroom censorship law modeled after the Trump administration's Executive Order 13950. Today, Megan continues her work to end the indefinite solitary confinement of people with death sentences in Oklahoma, vindicate the free speech rights of racial justice protesters, and ensure Oklahomans are not jailed simply because they cannot afford bail, and to protect transgender students and youth from state discrimination. Thank you for joining us, Megan. And we have Shauna Mootrat, who is a proud graduate of the Daniel Webster High School and Oklahoma State University. Shauna is the president of the Tulsa Classroom Teacher Association, TCTA. She's a member of the Oklahoma Education Coalition and has previously served on the board of directors for the Oklahoma Education Association, as well as the National Education Association. She also chairs the OEA Legislative Committee and is on the Uplift Ed and Oklahoma Women's Alliance boards. Shauna helped co-found the Tulsa Parent Legislative Action Committee, PLAC, and Shauna lives by the mantra, actions speak louder than words. She understands the starting line isn't the same for every child or every family. Thank you, Shauna, for joining us. And just once again, as you probably all heard from the bios, we have very knowledgeable panelists who have expertise in a variety of areas and are able to speak a lot to this topic from different perspectives. So once again, thank you for joining us. I'm just going to start out with a couple of questions directed to different panelists. I would like to start off with you, Megan, if that's okay. So how have you seen the role of freedom of speech interrupted in the classroom since the passing of the bill? And once Megan is done responding to the question, it's definitely open. The floor is definitely open to other panelists to also add their knowledge to this question. So thank you, Megan.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. We have seen quite a bit of impact from 1775 in Oklahoma classrooms, ranging from K through 12 all the way up to the university level. And while teachers are government employees, they still enjoy free speech rights in their classrooms. And this is because they have some exceptions to the government speech doctrine, because they serve such an important role in our society, because they are tasked with educating and training our youth to be full and educated members in a democratic society. And since the passage of 1775, we have seen a combination of teachers self-censoring because of fear of violating a very overbroad, vague, and at times undecipherable law that carries extreme consequences up to loss of licensure. And we've also seen administrators tasked with an additional difficult burden of interpreting the language of 1775, giving instructions to teachers that also violate their free speech rights in the classroom. For example, in Edmond Public Schools, English teachers were told not to use the terms diversity or white privilege in the classroom. That is a violation of teachers' free speech and an absurd instruction to have to impose. We've also seen teachers self-censor by changing pieces of their curriculum, by either lessening, restructuring, or all out eliminating class discussion questions to avoid touching any of the topics addressed by 1775. And at the university level, we have seen professors remove books from their curriculum because they deal with issues of racism and gender identity and sexuality. And also at the university level, we have seen professors receive similar instruction from administrators to include instruction from to a human relations professor who was told they could no longer test on critical race theory. In a human relations class, similarly, a French professor at OU has taken out all pieces of French literature that address sexuality and gender identity. I don't know what is left in French literature to exclude those terms, but we have seen official censoring and self-censoring from just terrified and confused teachers all across the state at all levels of education.
That is a very scary reality. Thank you for sharing. Wondering if any of the other panelists wanted to add to that, either from a secondary perspective or secondary education perspective, or even just in a primary perspective.
I will add to that, speaking specifically to K-12, the self-censoring has been extreme. And what I mean is, if you think of it like a spectrum, and it just runs the gamut on that spectrum, including we had teachers, quit already, and not just our specific district, but the profession, saying, I can't do this. The law is so broad, which it is. It says some things about one race or sex is not inherently superior to another race or sex, which we agree with. We feel the law is asinine, like many of our laws in Oklahoma. It's a solution looking for a problem, because if you believe one race or sex is inherently superior, that's an issue. But as teachers, we follow the curriculum, we follow the standards, and none of them say anything like that. But the self-censoring of taking out literature, taking out historically things that did happen, and we all know we need to learn our history so we're not doomed to repeat it. So fear has been weaponized against our profession. We've been defunded left and right. And yes, the budget has been bigger than in years, but I look at it like 100-foot hole was dug before many of the reps and senators who are there now in terms of budget for our state. And they filled back in 20 feet of dirt, which we haven't had any dirt put back in for years. So yes, celebration, but any teacher worth their salt, if you're my student, we have a mini celebration, and then I'm going to push you to go even further, to learn more, to do better. Like there's still an 80-foot hole. So we've been defunded, we've been deprofessionalized, now we're being demonized, villainized, and fears being weaponized against us. And all of this while parallels about how much we as a state love children makes zero sense to me, because teachers make all other professions possible, and we don't have enough as is. And who do you think that hurts most? And that's where my mama comes in, like, you're hurting my kids. So our children are suffering because of the vagueness of this law, and as Megan pointed out, the severe consequences for something that may just be, I get mad at you, so I say you said something. It's wild.
If I might follow up on that, I was just this morning here at the University of Central Oklahoma at a ceremony honoring our fall 2022 teacher education graduates, who are wonderful people. We heard an inspiring address from our Oklahoma Teacher of the Year, Rebecca Peterson, who's a math teacher at Union High School in Tulsa. And one of the things that Rebecca emphasized was she challenged us all to do more to support, to express our appreciation for our trust in our teachers. And one of the things that I really feel in the present moment in relation to House Bill 1775 and many other factors is this idea that somehow teachers are our enemies. They are out to do something that we collectively don't want done to our children. And so we have to really regulate at a minute level what is said, what is not said in the classroom, that we have to continue reaching in. And this also seems to me really wrong, having worked for 25 years with teacher candidates, that education is fundamentally dialogic. It's not monologic. It's not just, I tell you what to believe. I don't think any good teacher says, I'm going to tell you what to think. Teaching is about saying, these are historical events that have happened. These are issues in our culture on which there are many opinions. I'm not telling you what to believe, but this is the world we live in, that we're training you as students to go out and succeed and flourish in this world. And that's frightening. Here at UCO, we get complaints all the time. We understand, we've read the legislation. I don't think anyone is saying, I can't imagine, I don't know of anyone saying one race, one sex, one gender is inherently superior to another. But we get calls all the time that, so-and-so instructor, talked about the women's suffrage campaign, slavery, discrimination in the context of the civil rights movement. And we spend a great deal of time explaining, no one was saying, that guilt is hereditary, that a race or a gender is superior, but there is a kind of a force of, it wears you down after a while. And so it's not surprising to see our faculty, and I know lots of our secondary, primary teachers just saying, I'm not even going to go here now. The law doesn't prohibit us from having this discussion, but I know what's going to happen if we have this discussion. And on top of everything else, I'm not ready to deal with it. So there is this sort of wider silencing effect, because it is exhausting to fight the same battle, to offer the same explanation over and over and over and over again. It wears you out. This is not respecting our teachers. This is sort of infantilizing and demonizing our teachers.
I guess I'll jump in here and just make a few points related to the aspect of how freedom of speech and how it relates to how I'm typically involved in education. So I typically start with a general premise from a philosopher, educator, Paulo Freire, because he says all education is political. Everything, it is never a neutral item to talk about what it means to govern and to have a voice in how we choose what goes in the curriculum, what goes out of the curriculum. And as an instructor, as a teacher, as a facilitator of learning, what I don't include is just as important as what I do include. So when we talk about freedom of speech, we're talking, at least when I'm in my classroom, I'm talking about what is good teaching, what is exposing students to a variety of sources so that they can interpret. That is my job. That is my responsibility. If I only promote a single narrative, I am disservicing students. And so when I'm providing professional development for other teachers who are working with many, many, many students across varied age groups from pre-K all the way to college and university and postgraduate, we're affecting a lot of students. And the speech that we allow them to exercise and understand that when you say something, it may impact someone else. And considering that impact and being reflective about that impact is what's of concern. So part of my job as an educator, part of my job as a facilitator of even programming outside of the school that supplements what teachers are doing, is to make sure that students or any participant has an opportunity to evaluate how is my freedom to think about, to say what I say, and to consider how it impacts other people. That freedom is a privilege that I must protect. It is a privilege that I must insist that students exercise, but they have to understand the consequences, both good and challenging. So I think what we have as a concern as it relates to freedom of speech is making sure that we're always creating reflective citizens who understand this is not a journey of exercising my speech in isolation. My speech has all of the other individuals who disagree with me, who agree with me, but may be afraid to exercise their voices. So when I think about freedom of speech from many of the really difficult topics that we're talking about here today, where people are self-censoring, it is those who have the power to evaluate, to fire, dismiss, to respond to lawsuits, respond to allegations. Those are the individuals who I really want to know more about what they're saying about these laws. They're the individuals who have to stand with those classroom teachers who are dealing with the students one-on-one. So if a president, if a superintendent, if a school board does not stand by critical thinking and say, teachers must bring these difficult topics and we have to trust them, that is the threat to free speech. The one teacher in the classroom who shares an opinion that is not necessarily productive is a concern that can be dealt with. But what is much more difficult to deal with is when those who are in charge of enforcing the law, of responding to supporting the classroom teachers in general, when they don't have a stance, that is when free speech is really in jeopardy. So my thinking is always about those, when you have a leadership role, you must stand by critical thinking. You must stand by free speech, and you have to elevate the voices of those who are weaker and who have been hurt. So I do think this is always important to know that we must protect free speech, but we also know that we must protect when it's threatened for those who are weaker. And so that the classroom has changed because people are fearful. So that means we need more voices who are at the top, making those decisions, approving those decisions, making the policies and procedures that follow up on abuses. They're the ones who we need to make sure that they are taking responsibility and ensuring that classroom teachers and ultimately the students who are not getting or are getting censored when free speech is threatened.
Yeah, definitely acknowledging that free speech has in many ways been weaponized through this legislator to promote certain voices, but to silence others. I know each person briefly touched on this, but wanting to go back to Shauna and ask, what are guardrails provided, if any, for teachers and educators to navigate this new law? And what have you seen in that regards? Have there been any, given the ambiguity of the law?
So yes, and also no, because justice is in the eye of the beholder, in the eye of who is your judge or jury at that point. So I think we need to take that into account. I will be good, and that's all I'll say about that part right now. I could preach a sermon on that. But in terms of guardrails, our curriculum is our state standards. Everything that we go by as educators is that we go by the standards, and the standards say teach history. The standards say talk about this. The standards say do this. As long as an educator is following the standards, they're not violating anything. And so, to my knowledge, most every single educator does, because for self-preservation, if nothing else, as the educator in the classroom in front of all those kids, like, you've got to be on your pacing, you've got your plan to follow, you've got your curriculum. And more to what Dr. Dickens said about critical thinking, it's everything. You know, I taught competitive speech and debate, and will never forget a kid coming to me just shocked that he got 100 because he was the exact opposite of what I argued and debated. And they're two different things. But I said, you understood the assignment, you did your research. I don't have to agree with you. You have proven you can think critically and back it up with research. That is not just for debate class, right? That's for life. That's for any class. That's for outside of any class. That is life. And so the guardrails are follow the standards, and you're fine, because those are accepted, you know, by law. These are the standards. We follow them. It's okay. So I would like to alleviate fear on that note, and also activate people's advocacy, whether it's self-advocacy or group advocacy. Back to the critical thinking, there are people / groups who are elitist, who, you know, and I was amening you left and right, Dr. Dickens, because talk about like standing up for others, but there are those who don't want to, who they want that classist tiered system of the haves and the have-nots. So the haves are trying to make the chasm even wider between the haves and have-nots. And there is no such thing. You can't have an aristocracy without a peasant class. And there's no such thing as an educated peasant class. And we are seeing that through legislation, like trying to instill fear, trying to make you afraid to say this or that, or to teach this or that. But the guardrails are the standards. The standards are there. They've been accepted. That's what we follow. You follow the standards. You're not violating anything in 1775, although it is vague by design.
And I'd like to chime in with Shauna. I absolutely, I stand by the standards. If we teach the standards, we don't have problems with preparing the student for the educational experience they're supposed to have at grade level all the way to 12th grade and move them on to university or wherever they choose to go after high school. They're prepared. They've covered a broad range of topics, and the state has already put this out here. This is what should be taught. And so, but by subject, that's great. And what I add to that, based on, having many years been an affiliate with the National Writing Project through OSU Writing Project, we've always asked that teachers, when they're teaching, that the theory behind how to teach what you teach. That is so much more effective, because what we're wanting to do is that theory should not be a scary term that we say, oh my, that's too difficult to think about theory. Theory should actually be comforting, because it says if we follow this approach of this philosophy of teaching, this philosophy of learning, people are more inclined to grow and achieve the outcome that we want. So combining the standard with the theory of learning, theories of instruction will help safeguard, provide those guardrails to where people will more likely be successful. And that's our goal. We want students to be successful. We want families to be successful. We want citizens to be successful. The other thing that I would add is just in this whole process, helping students know why we're doing what we're doing. Why is it important? It's one thing for me to share 5 viewpoints of what happened as it relates to historical events or current day events that as they're happening. I can give you those 5 viewpoints, but I can also, before and during, I can say, what is the value of understanding from multiple viewpoints? What's the danger of just seeing one viewpoint? Letting them understand that if I do, I normally compare this to if I'm a child and I'm trying to convince my parent that I'm in the right when we've just had a falling out with my sister or another sibling, I'm going to tell you my truth. And I'm going to be perfectly innocent in my truth. Now, if I don't hear from my sister, then she's going to receive a much harsher outcome because there's one narrative. But what we have to help students understand is that I can look at any group. If I don't know their full story, I may not understand the impact of why things happen the way they happen, and I may not know how to respond in the best way to achieve the best outcome. So they need to understand that process, and they need to go looking for it themselves. That is what true education allows people to look at. If the students know it, the parents know it, and this is all part of the educational process. Teachers have such a big responsibility of not only teaching the subject, but K through 12 teachers in particular have so many audiences to appease. Not only the student, not only the parent, the school board, school administration, legislators. Then we have other school boards outside of, within your district, then you have state school boards, then you have funding that you have to deal with. So I think it's important for us to understand that it's never in isolation. And if students understand that as well, that helps them think through why we teach the way we teach. So I just say the guardrails are helping people see all of the multiple audiences that I don't necessarily use the word serve, but that we must attend to in order to make sure that everything comes together and that some people will be satisfied and others may not. But just understand, these are the multiple audiences that we have.
I would love to follow up. I agree with everything that has been said. It raises this situation raises an interesting question about, to whom are we responding and under what circumstances? I think we can be very clear in our classrooms, in our discussions within education about what our standards are and what we're doing. I think a lot of the critique, a lot of the anxiety that underlies House Bill 1775 and other legislation comes from a place where those standards, the theory, the principles that inform what we do are not understood, whether sort of willfully or not willfully, not understood. Why do we teach what we teach? Why do we believe that this is the best way to prepare people to be, successful citizens, leaders, engaged community members? I mean, unfortunately, maybe that makes yet another burden for those of us in education at every level, from the classroom teacher through administrators, through boards, which is to how do we spread the word? How do we counter the kinds of narratives we see on social media, in various kinds of mass media, in popular culture about what schools are and are not? Where does this stereotype of the sort of doctrinaire and indoctrinating classroom come from? And how do we begin to show in a way that is compelling and articulate that that's not what we're doing, but what we're doing may be different from what our communities remember or understand or misimagine about education? But I learned this. And as Dr. Dickens just said, this is one way of telling that story. People in other communities from other backgrounds, other perspectives have different ways of telling that story. We should hear them all, because that's the only way we're going to be able to triangulate some sense of who we are, where we come from, what is going on here. I want our communities to be invested in public education. Because in a weirdly ironic way, one of the challenges we have is that communities are often not invested, don't want to, pay for public education. We want to opt out of public education. We want to sort of deregulate certification processes, have a free-for-all. No, we want people to be engaged and informed. And we're getting a kind of engagement, I think, sometimes at various levels that's not informed. How do we, get the word out, not just to our students, not just to our parents, but yes, to our parents and families, and networks of support for our students and for the wider community who are also stakeholders in our public K through 12 and higher education systems, to really give a good accounting, not just of what we do, but why we do it, and why the things that you may think we're doing aren't what we're doing, aren't what we propose to do. And I know that in a time of tightened resources, understaffing, it's hard to think about doing more, but I don't know what else we can do but to say, wait a minute, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what takes place in our classrooms, from K-12 through colleges, universities. And we need to talk. We need to have a real discussion. Again, dialogic, not monologic.
Mhm. Those conversations are definitely important on all levels, and with fear inhibiting conversations, that's never a good thing. And just getting Megan's perspective on the constitutionality and the legality of this House bill, and what you've been doing with your work, and just what that looks like from a legal perspective. If you could speak to that briefly.
Certainly, I think it will be to no one's surprise that we do not believe 1775 is constitutional for a variety of reasons in a variety of circumstances. I mentioned previously how it violates the free speech rights of teachers in K through 12. It also violates the free speech rights of professors at the university level. Professors enjoy even stronger First Amendment protections under the doctrine of academic freedom than K through 12 teachers, and the language does not make it clear whether the university section is limited outside of the classroom or inside. It includes prohibitions of requirements. The requirement is never defined by 1775, so we don't know whether that means a requirement for a class, a class requirement for a major, or a class requirement for graduation. And so the academic freedom of professors at the university level is also restricted. Students have a First Amendment right to receive information. And so students' free speech rights to receive information is violated for students K through 12, as well as at the university, because we have seen 1775 encroaching upon university classrooms as well. It is unconstitutionally vague. That's a 14th Amendment violation, as well as overbroad. Oklahoma is somewhat unique among the states who have passed classroom censorship laws like this, in that the list of divisive concepts prohibited in K through 12, the language is shall require or make part of a course, which is extremely broad, right? Does that mean that you can't present the ideas listed in the divisive concepts? Does that mean that you cannot talk about individuals who advanced those ideas in your history or English classes? And so we have, and a lot of other states have said, instead of make part of a course, it's advocate or encourage for this list of divisive concepts. So Oklahoma's is uniquely overbroad, and that's a violation of the First Amendment. And then also a violation of students' equal protection rights, particularly for students of marginalized identities, because the resulting and intentional whitewashing of Oklahoma curricula in response to 1775 disproportionately impacts students with marginalized identities who are not seeing themselves or their experiences reflected in the curriculum. And so that disengages students and empirically results in poor educational outcomes for those students of minoritized identities. And I can go on further. I'll go ahead and stop there for time. Those are the main legal arguments that we make in our challenge to the law.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting, the overlap of the legal perspective and what educators are facing. And a bit sad that that's where we have to go with this. Realizing that, you know, giving educators a voice and being able to speak up for themselves when they're actively, you know, being censored in different ways. So thank you for sharing that perspective, Megan. At this time, we're going to open the floor to questions, and I will hand over to Shadi.
Hello. So I'm going to start with a question from Breton White Fox. It says, is there any way to use the language of the law to empower BIPOC students and families to demand teaching honest history and diversity, equity, and inclusion topics in order to prevent any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race or sex, and not just protecting white students and families' feelings? And whoever can jump in, please.
I don't have a yes or no answer in typical attorney fashion, so my apologies, but that very issue is something that we do discuss in our litigation related to that specific divisive concept, right? That students should not feel discomfort. And like I said, when I was describing the equal protection claim, marginalized students may feel discomfort by their exclusion from the curriculum. And so that is an open question, and we have not seen any interpretation of that particular concept. And so it could, however, the cautionary caveat that I would add is it is always dangerous to use language written with the intent to uphold white supremacy through a system that also upholds white supremacy, right? So we have these structures in place who are charged with enforcing 1775. The language during the law's legislative history has made clear for everyone what the intended result of this language should be. And then you also have the very severe potential consequences for teachers. And so, yes, I think it's a really interesting open question, especially with that particular divisive concept, but just always proceed with caution when trying to subvert something so effectively steeped within a given power structure.
Well, just one point that always comes up, at least in the conversations I tend to have. The interesting thing about this sense of feeling guilt is that we're talking about white groups of people feeling guilt. For most minority groups, this sense of feeling uncomfortable is always happening because of how they're depicted in history. So you're going to show people of color, African Americans, Native American, Asian Americans, you're going to show them in a negative light in history comfortably and not be concerned about their discomfort with the consistent negative portrayals in history or in literature, and not have legislation to protect them so that their counter narrative is absolutely included in historical depictions. That is part of the contradiction here, is that students are going through a school system and not finding themselves in a favorable light, and they're feeling discomfort. They're being poorly represented. The legislation does not address their discomfort. It addresses the discomfort of exposing their counter narrative in contradiction to the narrative that makes another group of people have to doubt how history has been written for hundreds of years, making them look better. And so it's just it's a concern that probably can only be achieved by a lawsuit from those groups of individuals who are depicted negatively, and seeing how that law upholds their concern.
I just want to jump in on guilt and discomfort. How ridiculous. And let's just talk about faith. Within different faiths, what you feel or what makes you feel guilt or discomfort changes. Within the same faith, within different denominations, what makes you feel guilt or discomfort changes. Within my faith, within my denomination, depending on which church in Tulsa I choose, what makes me feel guilt or discomfort changes depending on which church, same denomination, same faith. And having taught theater, you know, we go see plays, we watch TV shows, we watch movies, we go do those things because we want to feel something, documentaries, etc., whatever. And sometimes it's because we want to, you know, you listen to certain songs because you're angry or you're sad and you want to have a good cry, whatever. So when talking about evoking emotion, how asinine to put that into legislation what, the beatings will continue until morale improves? I mean, how do I know what makes you feel guilt or discomfort, and that doesn't change from hour to hour, especially with teenagers, because I'm a high school teacher, okay? And furthermore, when my kids were little and they would have growing pains, I just came up with this one that day, and I use it for everything now. I'm like, they're not called growing comfortables. And that's the thing. Like, if we want to grow and change,
Hmm.
you want discomfort. Discomfort forces you to move. And so we're not teaching that. We're teaching to the standards. But what an inane, insane, asinine thought to think that I can tell you what's going to cause you discomfort or guilt within hour to hour. And particularly, you know, any person, but especially any K-12 child. I just had to say that.
No, I would echo that. I was thinking along the same lines, that the idea that you can have real learning, real education without discomfort is ridiculous to me. I mean, education, learning is discovering new knowledge that forces you to reorganize the things you know, to make, hard decisions, not just about what you believe, but about what you're going to do. I mean, I don't think people's guilt is not constructive. The question is, what are you responsible to do as, an emerging member of this community and this society? What are your obligations? And again, it's not the monologic, I'm going to tell you exactly what you should do, but ideally, we're going to equip you to think through the complexities of real issues so that you can make informed decisions, which you can't do if we can't talk about whole areas of learning. So, I mean, the discomfort of some dimension, not the discomfort of being singled out, marginalized, silenced, and excluded, but the discomfort of being in a really energetic and raucous space where you hear a lot of ideas. Basically, that's the public forum. That's life. And how are we preparing anyone to function if we're not providing in the classroom that, not intimidating, but that safe space to hear these voices, to think about these conflicting ideas, and to develop the strategies you're going to use for your whole life to make sense of them and to make those hard decisions about who am I going to be and what am I going to do.
So may I add, just I like to remind people of the good things that have happened as a result of all of this. What has happened is higher education individuals, K-12 individuals, have started talking more about critical thinking, about the need to share these multiple viewpoints. And we have become much more intentional regarding what we put in our classrooms. And so even though, and what I find is when we have opposition to good teaching, this is what I call it. This is opposition to good, sound teaching where critical thinking happens and better citizens emerge. When this attack happens, good teachers get better. And students will benefit because now teachers are aware, much more aware, of how this attack threatens our future. And I think it exposes that type of challenge. So I don't want to, I hate to leave any room with a sense of doom when I realize we are now better teachers. We are now much better at writing our curriculum so that it addresses the standards and that we make sure the standards are clear. So I like to leave with that sort of thinking. There is hope, there is more hope today for better teaching as a result of this attack on education.
And just as our time is nearing an end, thank you all for participating in this. I just wanted to give our panelists a few moments to give last takes for the audience. What would you say should be the main takeaway from this conversation, and from your expertise and experience with this conversation as well?
Can I add one thing too? If you all could speak to what the average person can do as well in relation to this, that would be amazing.
Oh, yes. I would like you to look up, if you don't already know, who your state rep is and who your state senator is, both at home and at work, because you can vote for them from where you live, but you work within their district if it's a different district, and speak to what you think is important. No, I mean, most teachers are parents, so trying to divide us also, crazy town. Just speak to us as a community. And earlier, someone was talking about, I think it was you, Dr. Macy, that everyone should be concerned about public ed, and they should. Over 90% of American children attend public schools. That's 90% of the future of our nation. Over 95% of Oklahoma children attend public schools. So how goes public education in Oklahoma, so goes our state. And, teachers' working conditions are students' learning conditions, and students' learning conditions are teachers' working conditions. So I would just really implore you to form a relationship with your senator and rep. They're people just like us. Overwhelming majority have good intentions, even if they come from a different place or perspective, and just form that relationship and start talking to them about the issues that matter. Thank you.
Yes, I would just echo what Shauna just said. Get to know, talk to your legislators. I would also say, whether you have children currently, might someday have children in the public schools, get to know your public school system. Don't just listen to what you hear in the media, what you hear in the community. The same thing we teach our students. Find out for yourself, investigate, go to your school board meetings, talk to your teachers, your principals, learn about what's going on in the schools, maybe even volunteer to, help out in the schools so you can see for yourself, right? What's going on? And then you can be a really informed, productive contributor to this discussion, which, as Shauna said, is a discussion for all of us in the community, not just those of us who are current students and current parents of students, family members, guardians of students.
I would just say, read House Bill 1775. Don't just take what anyone is summarizing about it. It's only about 4 pages. It will not hurt. Read the House bill and just understand what it says and what it does not say. But then once you read it, respond, get involved.
Yeah, I would echo the encouragement of all my fellow panelists, but also add, you can run to be on your local school board. If you want to help shape how this oppressive law is interpreted, you can. A lot of that decision-making happens at the local school board level. For my general takeaway, I think I would say that this kind of classroom censorship around discussions of race and identity and sexual orientation and gender is not new. This is certainly a new wave, but we have seen it before as a country. We saw it after Brown versus Board of Education. And classroom censorship bills like this one have always been intended to undercut the integrity of the public school system for the purposes of segregating education. This is more than a classroom censorship measure. This is an attack on the integrity of public education and an attempt to uphold arguments in favor of school segregation and school choice. These issues do not occur in a vacuum. They are all interrelated which means that fighting for truth and debate and collaboration and diversity in every and all spheres is an attack on 1775. And you're already here, you're already participating in public discourse and education. So keep at it, keep fighting. We appreciate you.
And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, our lovely participants, our panelists. Thank you for your time. Just a few housekeeping things. ILI applications are open. If you know anyone that you would like to recommend for that, please do. We are also having an interfaith tour in January, so please keep posted for that. And please sign up for our newsletter. And thank you all for your time. And we definitely honor and appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you. Done with me? Good. Okay.
You're good. Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you. Bye.
I was wondering if you have, never mind.